So Betty, can you tell us a little bit about your background in terms of the Heather Heritage Society?
Well, I am one of the founding members of the Heather Heritage Society, and am now an honorary member of the society. My work experience that led to me being one of that original board is that after graduating, I was the former president of the VGH School of Nursing Alumni Association. And following VGH training, graduation, I worked at VGH, first of all as a staff nurse, assistant head on my ward, and then head nurse. And that ward included a medical ward and a research ward.
Oh, what building was that in?
That was in Heather.
In Heather.
This was all my experience at that time was all in Heather. And I then went on to life as a wife and mother. When my children were teenagers, there was one day when suddenly I had an urge to return to nursing. I called VGH, someone I knew in administration, and said, at one time you had a program that took VGH graduates who wished to return and brought them back to the hospital, and they could work. You arranged work sessions appropriate until they felt they were ready to be tested. They were done
like a refresher course.
But it was totally within hospital and only available to VGH graduates. It was Ivy Norrington.
Yeah.
And she said, "Oh, Betty, we're so short-staffed right now." She said, "I wish we still did that, but I have to tell you something. Yesterday, we started the one-time only refresher course. Can you be here tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.? Next morning at 8 a.m. I was there and did the refresher course, realized that the summer I had expected to take off would completely dissolve everything I'd learned, so went to work again at VGH as a float, a replacement in just every area.
Right.
And even some, well, we won't go into that. Worked there for a while, but living on the North Shore, realized that that drive was not so good. Had applied at Lionsgate, which was full. Got a call from them, eventually went to that there was a position, went to Lionsgate, where the head of nursing happened to be my nursing arts instructor from many years before VGH, who was happy to get one of her graduates back. I worked again in this floating capacity, went on from there to a nursing supervisor position. That position does not exist anymore, I think, in any hospital. And I retired as a nursing supervisor from Lionsgate.
Great, great.
And how about you? What have you done?
It wasn't quite as long. That I graduated a little bit after you.
Well, I was 53.
Yeah. And I worked for a year at VGH, and then I decided that I needed more education. So off I went to McGill and got a Bachelor of Nursing, came back and taught nursing at St. Paul's just as the schools of nursing were phasing out because all nurses were expected to have a baccalaureate degree. So I went into administration. And fortunately, several of us from the school were able to go in, and we introduced a number of innovative changes in nursing in terms of delivery of care. It wasn't always easy working with the various people, but we did. So I worked as a change agent actually for a couple of years. And then we reorganized our department, and then I decided I needed to go back to school again. So I went for my master's degree at McMaster University. Very innovative program, and then came back and was working at St. Paul's. The director position came up, and I applied. I didn't get the job.
At St. Paul's?
At St. Paul's. But that was the first, would be the second non-nun at that at the hospital. And I didn't get the job, but I said, fine, it's no problem. A colleague of mine got the job. So I then was looking in the paper one day, and there was a position at Richmond General, an assistant director of nursing. So I went out there, and I was there for 10 years. Again, in introducing a lot of changes. And then I decided to retire. So, of course, I couldn't keep still, so I got busy doing a lot of volunteer work. So I got involved in the VGH School of Nursing Alumni Association and eventually became president, as you did. I then worked with the BC History of Nursing for 14 years. I was the president. And then I'm also with the Canadian Association of History of Nursing. And of course, because the Alumni Association is situated in the Heather Pavilion, I became involved in the Heather Heritage Society. So, full circle. So that's where we are in terms of that. But you've got lots of memories in terms of working there.
Well, I do. And even after I had left nursing, and I was involved with nursing associations at the board level for both the RNABC, which no longer exists, and also the BC Nurses Union, because I was not in administration, but anyway, not considered that. And as well as that, I was for 1 year on the board of the Lionsgate Hospital Association when they had some difficulties in the direction the care was going, and the person that likely fomented most of this could not be fired by the board, but the Victoria, the government said, well, we can't fire so-and-so, but we can fire the whole board, and they did. And so they had a whole board to replace, and I was one of the souls that went in there with my nursing background. It was a very interesting, I was just there for a year. There was a change of government, and my year was at an end. So people knew about this background, and in the early 90s, VGH had announced plans that included the destruction of Heather. The original Vancouver General Hospital, built just over the turn of the century to last for a long time, and several people were concerned about this and began a little network of information to say, look, let's do something about this. Can we do something? They were concerned about both the loss of the heritage and also the value of that building. So with all of that background, it took a little while, but the Heather Heritage Society was formed with a view to preserving this building for very valid reasons. And the people who were involved came from many backgrounds.
Yes,
Cross-section of Vancouver.
Really was.
Yes. So that's how the Heather
you worked
Heritage.
very quickly, because within almost a year, you went to the city and got a heritage status for the building.
Yes, I think it was a little more than a year. But getting heritage status also clarified that the ownership of that building was with the people of Vancouver, and so that has been a key,
historic,
a very key part of why we've been able to preserve this building this long.
Right. Well, I can remember being a very new student nurse, walking into one of the units on Heather, which had 20 men in one room. All that divided the beds was a single curtain. And there we were in our little blue dresses and our little white aprons, our black shoes and stockings, learning how to make a bed, serve a meal without spilling it all over the patient, take their vital signs, learned how to talk to them. But of course, with only one little curtain, you can imagine how the conversations could be heard around. So at night, of course, we were all comparing stories back in the residence system. What happened to you today? Well, one of my classmates was not in that big room. There was another room with 2 patients in it. And so she thought this patient looked pretty fit. He didn't have a cast on his leg. So she said, would you just mind sitting in that chair there while I make your bed? And he said, well, I would, honey, but my legs are tied to the bottom of the bed. He was
a prisoner.
A prisoner. So we learned all kinds of things, but we shared it in the residence.
Yes.
The residence had so many memories with 22 women living in one corridor with one telephone for us.
That was,
in each
but that
corridor.
was the residence which no longer belongs to VGH.
That's
but was,
right. It was
yes,
sold. Yeah.
it's the one on the south side of 12th Avenue at Heather.
Yeah. But you have experiences
Well,
on some other
I
residences.
did
Why
eventually
didn't you
live
tell
in
us?
that residence, but when I came out to Vancouver in 1950, we were all housed in, I think they called them the Heather Shacks,
The
which
shacks.
gives you, something like that. It was the Heather, they were put up as temporary buildings during the war.
Okay.
This was 1950. We were housed in 10-bed dormitories, 5 beds down each side. Your head was recessed by about 1.5 feet with your closet, and just a little ways from the foot of the bed was your dresser. That was what, but you became very supportive of each other. Those people became very good friends. And we got to know each other very well, and so you had a support group right away. At the end of about a year, the 1914, those were to be closed down in the 1914 residence, which was at the north side of 12th Avenue on Heather, and is still in use. It's the 1914 building. And it was made available to our group and others. And they were all either 2 or 3 bedrooms, although I think there was one 5-bedroom somewhere. I forget where it was. And so we were there for a year, and then we went from that to this lovely, modern, new building where we each had our own room with a sink, a desk, a bed, a closet. But as you say, no telephone. And so that when a call came in for one of the students, it was taken by the matrons at the desk who phoned to the floor. Someone going by answered, oh, it's for Susie Jones, and you'd stand out in the hall and yell. Do you remember? And if somebody'd say, no, she's not. It was a very informal, but somehow it worked. It worked.
Yeah,
but we thought we were just in the lap of luxury, our own rooms. If you were entertaining a gentleman caller, you did so in what they called the bow rooms, which were little private sitting rooms on the main floor, not too far from the matrons. And there was something about those doors, when they were folding doors, you could not close them.
That's right. There was 1 foot they wouldn't close, so they could always see in.
Always.
See it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And our social life was overlooked, really, by our social director, which I understand that position vanished after a while. But while I was there, we were still under her watchful eye. She organized a number of events. They were carefully supervised. They were, and there was she had access to a stock of tickets
Yes.
to various events, and there'd be a little notice go up, I think, in the elevators, or the notice board at the front desk. 4 tickets to the symphony concert at 3 p.m. at the, and fine, the first. So we were, as well as that, VGH supported 2 off-site
cottages, weren't they?
Cottages.
Yeah.
One at the beach in Crescent Beach, and the other one was a ski cabin on the North Shore. You had to get yourself there, but you went armed with, you went to the kitchen, the diet kitchen, and said you were so-and-so, you were going to such and such, and they would provide you with a picnic lunch.
That was all gone by the time my class
That didn't
there.
happen to you.
No, it
Too bad.
didn't.
They were
It
wonderful
didn't.
memories.
However, let's go back to the residence, because the residence was connected by tunnel
Yes.
to the rest of the hospital. Now, this was great when it was raining, because you didn't have to go outside to walk across 12th, which did not have a light then. It does now. And so you would go in through the tunnel and over to Heather and up to the 3rd floor for meals and also to work, right? So, unfortunately, it also restricted us a bit, because if you had to be in by the curfew, which was 10:30, you had to get through the front door with the matrons and sign in. However, there was an alternate way of getting in. If you could get into Heather, you could go down and go under 12th Avenue and go to the door. But you had to have someone on the other side to open the door, because the matrons knew when the door opened. So one of my classmates just recently told us about a situation where a friend of hers stayed on the other side until she came back, knocked on the door, and they scooted back upstairs up to their rooms. So that was, the tunnels were great in the fact that we could transport patients from Heather Pavilion to the children's wing to over to the newer buildings without ever having to take them outside. But it was a restriction for our social life. Yes.
Well, if you had been there at the Heather, at the dormitory phase,
Yes, right.
and had a date that was going to go past the curfew time, which varied. It got later and later as you got longer in your
And you got older,
stay there. Yes, but I only did this once. But there was an entry back, and at the dorm at the far western edge, there was a window left conveniently open, and your date boosted you up to that window, and you crawled through, crawling over the bed of the student nurse who was occupying that bed. You then had a second little problem to negotiate. The matrons made rounds, and so to get back to your dormitory, you had to get out and get to your dorm. So the usual practice was to take off all of your outer clothing, bundle it up somewhere, and in case you got caught, and nip into the bathroom, shared bathrooms, and then go down to your room and just hope you didn't
run into anyone
you didn't
on
run.
the way.
I don't remember any access to the 1914 building, and I had heard rumors. I didn't do this my 3rd and last year, that there was a certain window that you could access from, I think it was 14th, but that was a myth. I don't know for sure, and I never experienced. But your social life was controlled, but not completely.
No.
Actually, that social life was something that I remember a patient and of course, we were all living on very little each month, a few dollars. But this was a young Englishman that had had a catastrophic accident aboard the ship just as it was coming into Vancouver, and was taken to VGH. His name, I think, was Dixie. Don't remember his real name. And he was treated very successfully, but it was a long treatment. And of course, the British Merchant Marine didn't pay very well, so he had no money. He was in a strange country, and there was a theater down on Broadway. I think it may have been called the Broadway Theater, and they had let it be known that Dixie and someone with him would be admitted free to any of their movies.
Oh.
And so if you wished, you could go down to the ward and see if Dixie wanted to go down to that particular movie. And because he had to be accompanied by a nurse. And there you had your free movies while Dixie was there. I also remember one particular patient. It was my first patient to whom I was responsible for the care, and I was to give a bed bath to this patient. Okay. She happened to be housed in the little corridor on the women's floor on B floor. And as somebody told me what her name was, and it didn't really ring a bell, she happened to be the mother of our nursing arts instructor. Oh. Let me tell you, I was very careful to do my best.
Good for you. Now, we nursed at the time when patients were still segregated.
Oh, by heavens,
sex,
yes.
By level of ability to pay. That was still in the 60s.
Right.
Remember, we had private wards.
You're right. You had
with fancy things, linen and things like that. But you also nursed before when we had some epidemics. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I was there. I was slated for my infectious diseases experience at the height of the polio epidemic. Oh, wow. So I couldn't tell you how to take care of most infectious diseases because I never experienced them. The entire building on the south side of 12th Avenue, I think, would be 2 floors, and although who knows, we may have taken over that third. And every patient there had polio. Oh many in iron lungs. Yeah. But all very sick. And what became the most important thing for you, you learned how to take care of your patients very well, but you had to take care of yourself. And of course, in infectious diseases, washing hands is so important. So your treasure in the whole world became the little piece of cocoa butter you had, which seemed to be the only thing that you could put on your hands that would keep them from being raw.
Yeah, because you were washing so often.
Yeah. Oh, yes, yeah. And you had to do.
Yes, yeah. But TB was also going at that time too, wasn't it? Like polio was
yes,
sort of...
and we were the class of 1950. Graduating in 53, was the first class to have the Bacillus of Calmette-Guerin, which is a protection against tuberculosis. We were also the first class to go through our entire training and not have one of our members develop TB.
Excellent, because some did.
Some.
Yeah, and had to go up to Trunk-Hill.
Well, no. We had a beautiful TB hospital. So some were sent to Trunk-Hill. It depended on the length of their care expected. I think there were several other criteria, but they were treated there, and you did learn how to take care of of these patients with TB. Because the disease gradually came under much better control, the need for beds shrank.
Right.
And that space, a beautiful building. It was compared to some of the other spaces, perhaps almost luxurious because of the room it had. And one of the other things that it had was a beautiful operating room. Because of course they still did surgeries.
That's right.
And they removed a lobe of lung. And that, no longer being needed, was adapted for open heart surgery. And so VGH then had a wonderful open heart surgery OR with a gallery, which none of the operating rooms in VGH had, where you could watch that. And I was privileged to be able to watch.
Really?
Yeah, two of them. It was fascinating. But there was a little surprise for the patients, because as well as the surgery, your immediate post-op care had to be very carefully managed. And the patients who were in these smallish wards would wake up, oh my goodness, there's a man next to me, and I'm no segregation. And all of a sudden, things didn't go belly up or that. This was a new introduction. Yes. And male and female patients in the same wards.
But then we got into the other segregation and that type of thing. So, and now it's turning again, isn't it? It's turning again because of bed shortages. Yeah. So we've got memories of Heather, and we know that it's still there because the Alumni Association, which has been in business since 1908, 2 years after the hospital was actually opened, our school started the Alumni Association then. And we've been in existence since then. And we are actually housed in Heather in the old emergency, the original emergency in that building.
Oh, gosh, I remember.
Yeah. Because we used to be in the residence, and then, of course, when the VGH residence, nurses' residence, was sold and is now being repurposed as a condominium, we had to be moved. And so we actually exist there. So we have, with our 8,700 graduates, we have an alumni of 700 people, which is an amazing feat in this day and age. But we also have a lot of artifacts and archives, which we would like properly stored, including 2 iron lungs. And
a pediatric lung.
Yes, the pediatric one and the adult one. And so we would like them stored properly and displayed. So over the years, our dear Heather Heritage Society has been trying to come up with innovative ideas, listening to the VGH administrative people telling us that yes, the building will be repurposed, but it hasn't been yet. And we know that there are many departments still operating in that building. And so that's why...
Well, isn't one of them the sniffer dogs?
Yes, the dogs are right next to us on the main floor. Yeah.
And
all the health records are being housed in that building. So that's the reason we're here, right? To carry on and to try and see whether we can't spur the hospital on to consider that building as a viable building that can be repurposed. We know that sections were added on in the 50s, and some have been removed on the 10th Avenue side, which is where the lovely semicircular driveway was.
Used to be in the Rose Gardens.
Yes, and the Rose
Gardens were still there when I arrived, but only briefly.
Well, they're not there now. There is a garden, but it's not the same. Anyways, we and you with your founding group are carrying on to try and complete some kind of action in terms of restoring this building to a purposeful building for whatever. We know that things have to be done. We know it's going to be expensive, but we are still there and still hanging on to try and
With an eye.
to see whether in fact it can't be completed.
Well, it should be, and in fact, I'll say it must be restored to a useful space. It's just so wasteful otherwise. It's several ideas have been put forward for what it can be. Picture it as part of the healthcare campus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there are needs that are not being met, nor can one think of it. One needs somebody, some people, some organization with deep pockets. We did what we could, and we're continuing to do it. Yes, to keep this building. We're concerned not only about the loss of heritage, but also the value of that building. And it was built to last. It's still lasting, but how much longer?
How much longer?
How much longer?
Yeah.
So
we won't give up hope.
no.
There we go.